blood, dust, the crack of gunfire splitting the desert night. Evelyn Carter is running for her life through the Arizona wasteland, barefoot, breathless, hunted like an animal by men who call her property. She was supposed to marry into power. Instead, she discovered a terrible secret that would condemn innocent lives to slavery. Now mercenaries are closing in and death feels closer than dawn. But in her darkest moment, a shadow moves. An Apache warrior, a stranger, her only hope. Stay with me until the end of this forbidden love story and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this journey travels. The desert doesn't forgive. Evelyn learned that truth with every bleeding step, every gasp of hot air that scorched her throat like swallowing fire. The silk hem of what had once been an expensive dress, ivory white, hand-stitched in San Francisco, now hung in shreds around her calves, brown with dust and dark with blood from a dozen cuts she couldn't remember getting. Behind her, the horses were getting closer. She could hear them now, the thunder of hooves against hardpan, the occasional shout carried on the wind. They weren't trying to be quiet anymore. They didn't need to be. She was alone on foot, and the moon hanging overhead was thin as a whisper, offering just enough light to see the rocks that waited to trip her, but not enough to find real shelter. Their movement at 2 o'clock. The voice echoed across the canyon, and Evelyn's heart lurched. She pressed herself against a boulder chest, heaving, trying to quiet her breathing, even as her lungs screamed for air. The stone was still warm from the day's heat, rough against her palms. How long had she been running? Hours, days' time had lost meaning somewhere between the moment she'd climbed out her bedroom window and now, when every second stretched into an eternity of terror. Miss Carter, another voice, this one smoother, almost pleasant. Thomas Reed, her father's head of security, the man who'd taught her to ride when she was 7. Miss Carter, please. You're going to hurt yourself out here. Your father's worried sick. We just want to bring you home safely. Liar. The word blazed through her mind with perfect clarity. She'd heard them talking 3 nights ago, standing outside the study where she'd been hiding behind the curtains. Not Reed, he was too careful, but Marcus Webb, the man she was supposed to marry in 2 weeks. The Apache prisoners from the reservation raid. How many can the Copper Ridge mine take? 50, maybe 60 if we pack them in. They don't last long underground, but they're cheap. Perfect. Once I marry the Carter girl, her father's railroad contracts will be mine. We'll have a pipeline from reservation to mine to profit. She'd run that very night. Now Reed's voice called out again, closer. We know you're tired, miss. Be reasonable. Where are you going to go, Mexico? You wouldn't last a day. Come out and we'll forget this whole misunderstanding. Evelyn closed her eyes, tasting blood from her split lip. She'd bitten it somewhere during the fall into the ravine 2 miles back. Every part of her body hurt. Her feet were raw meat, her hands scraped to the bone, and there was a deep ache in her ribs that suggested something might be cracked. But she would die before she went back. She would die before she became part of that machine, the elegant dinners and silk gowns that masked the buying and selling of human lives, the respectable society that built fortunes on broken backs and mass graves. The sound of horses split in 2 directions. They were flanking her position, boxing her in. Evelyn felt panic rising like bile, hot and acidic. She looked around desperately, but there was nowhere to go. The boulder behind her backed onto a sheer cliff face. To her left and right, nothing but open ground where she'd be spotted immediately. She was trapped. I see her due west behind the red rock. Evelyn's body moved before her mind caught up. She ran. It was stupid, hopeless, but her legs pumped anyway, carrying her across the hardpan toward a cluster of scrub brush that wouldn't hide a rabbit, much less a desperate woman. The sound of pursuit exploded behind her, hooves, shouts, the metallic click of rifles being readied. Don't shoot, the boss wants her alive. 20 yards, 15. She could see the brush ahead, pathetic and sparse. Beyond it, nothing but more open desert stretching toward mountains that might as well have been on the moon for all the good they'd do her. 10 yards. A horse surged past her on the right, cutting off her angle, another on the left. She was being herded like cattle, trapped in a closing circle of horseflesh and gunmetal. Her foot caught on something, a root, a rock she never knew, and she went down hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. For a moment she couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only lie there, tasting dirt and defeat. The horses formed a ring around her, their riders silhouetted against the star-filled sky. 6 of them. Reed sat his horse with easy confidence, a rifle resting across his saddle. "End of the line, Miss Carter," he said, not unkindly. "You gave us a hell of a chase, I'll grant you that. But it's over now." Evelyn pushed herself up to her knees, swaying. Blood dripped from her chin onto the dust. She looked up at the men surrounding her and saw no mercy there, only calculation. How much is she worth? Will Webb still pay full price if she's damaged? "I won't go back," she said, her voice raw from screaming and dust. "I'll die first." Reed sighed. "Don't be dramatic. Your daddy loves you. Webb loves you. This is just wetting nerves, that's all. You'll feel better after a bath and a good night's sleep." "Webb is selling Apache prisoners to mining camps," Evelyn said flatly. "I heard him. I know what you all are." The silence that followed was heavy with danger. Reed's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a calculation being made, a line being crossed. "Well," he said softly, "that does complicate things." He raised his hand, a signal. 2 of the riders dismounted, moving toward her with coiled ropes. They were going to bind her, gag her, take her back to become Mrs. Marcus Webb. And after the wedding, after the contracts were signed and the money had changed hands, she'd have an accident, a fall from a horse, a fever that wouldn't break, something tragic but convenient. She would never see another sunrise as a free woman. Evelyn looked around frantically, but there was nowhere left to run. The men were too close now, reaching for her arms. She tried to pull away, but her body was too spent, too broken. One of them grabbed her wrist, his grip bruising, and then the night exploded. It happened so fast that Evelyn's mind couldn't process it. One moment the man was holding her wrist, and the next he was on the ground, clutching his throat, making wet, choking sounds. Blood black in the moonlight poured between his fingers. The second man barely had time to turn before something flashed in the darkness, and he went down too silent and sudden as a candle being snuffed out. Chaos erupted. The mounted men wheeled their horses' rifles, coming up, shouting in confusion and fear. Reed was yelling orders, but his voice was drowned out by the sharp crack of gunfire. Evelyn threw herself flat, pressing her body into the dirt as bullets whined overhead. She couldn't see who was attacking, couldn't see anything but chaos and shadow and the occasional muzzle flash. A horse screamed and went down, throwing its rider. Another bolted its rider, sawing frantically at the reins. Reed fired 3 shots into the darkness, then swore and spurred his mount toward cover. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the shooting stopped. Evelyn lay frozen, afraid to breathe. The silence was worse than the gunfire, pregnant with violence, heavy with unseen threats. Somewhere nearby, a wounded man was whimpering. A horse whinnied nervously. A shadow detached itself from the scrub brush 20 feet away. Evelyn's breath caught. The figure moved like smoke, utterly silent, crossing the open ground between them in seconds. As it drew closer, the moonlight revealed details. A tall man, lean and muscular, wearing dark clothing that blended with the night. Long black hair tied back, a rifle slung across his back, and a knife still dripping in his hand. An Apache warrior. Evelyn had seen Apache before from a distance, from the safety of her father's private railroad car as they passed through reservation land. Curiosities to be observed, problems to be managed, obstacles to progress. She'd heard all the stories, of course. Savages, heathens, killers. But she'd never been this close to one, never seen the intelligence in those dark eyes, the controlled grace of movement, the absolute calm of a predator who knew exactly how dangerous he was. He stopped 3 feet away, looking down at her side. His face was a map of violence, a scar running from his left temple to his jaw, another across his right shoulder, visible where his shirt hung torn. These were not old wounds faded with time. These were fresh earned in some recent battle she couldn't imagine. Evelyn's hand closed on a rock the size of her fist. It was pathetic as weapons went, but it was all she had. "Stay back," she managed, her voice shaking. "I'm not going to. I won't." The warrior tilted his head, studying her. His gaze moved over her torn dress, her bleeding feet, her battered face. He looked at the bodies on the ground, then back toward where Reed and the surviving mercenaries had retreated. Then, moving slowly, so slowly it couldn't possibly be threatening, he shrugged out of the blanket he wore draped over one shoulder. It was rough wool, dark brown, woven in a pattern Evelyn didn't recognize. He held it out to her, not coming any closer, not saying a word, just offering. Evelyn stared at the blanket, then at him, trying to understand. This man had just killed 2 people with a knife and driven off 4 armed riders without taking a scratch. He could do anything he wanted to her, take her, kill her, leave her. Instead, he was offering her his blanket. "I don't," her voice cracked. "Why would you help me?" The warrior didn't answer. Maybe he didn't speak English. Maybe he simply saw no point in explanations. He just stood there, blanket extended, waiting with infinite patience. Slowly moving like she was approaching a wild animal, Evelyn reached out and took the blanket. It was warm from his body heat and heavier than she'd expected. She pulled it around her shoulders, and the simple comfort of it, of warmth, of covering of something soft against her shredded skin, nearly broke her. She felt tears burning in her eyes but refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not until she understood what was happening. The warrior nodded once, satisfied. Then he moved fast and purposeful, grabbing her arm and pulling her to her feet. Evelyn gasped at the sudden movement, her abused muscles screaming in protest, but he was already moving, half dragging, half carrying her towards the deeper darkness of the canyon. Behind them, Reed's voice echoed across the desert. "We're not done here, Miss Carter. You hear me? We'll find you." But the warrior didn't slow down. He moved through the darkness like he'd been born to it, finding paths where Evelyn saw only shadow, avoiding obstacles she couldn't see until they were past them. His hand on her arm was firm but not painful, guiding more than forcing. They ran, or he ran, while she stumbled and limped beside him for what felt like hours but was probably minutes. The sounds of pursuit faded behind them, swallowed by the enormity of the desert night. Finally, when Evelyn thought her legs would simply give out and she'd collapse regardless of danger, the warrior stopped. They were in a narrow crevice between 2 rock faces, barely wide enough for 1 person, much less 2. The warrior released her arm and pressed himself against one wall, indicating she should take the other. Evelyn obeyed, sliding into the gap, the rough stone catching at the blanket. They stood there in the darkness, inches apart, both breathing hard. Evelyn could feel the heat coming off his body, could smell leather and smoke and something else, sage, maybe, or desert herbs. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Minutes passed, then a sound reached them. Horses moving slowly, searching. Reed and his men refusing to give up. The warrior didn't move, didn't even seem to breathe. He was utterly still, watching the narrow slice of visible desert through the crevice opening. Evelyn tried to match his calm, but every muscle in her body was screaming, and her mind was racing with questions and fear and a strange, desperate hope she didn't dare examine. The sounds moved closer, stopped. Evelyn heard Reed's voice frustratingly close. "They can't have gone far. Spread out, check every rock, every hole. I want her found before dawn." The warrior's hand moved to the knife at his belt, not drawing it, just resting there ready. Evelyn held her breath. The sounds of searching continued for an eternity, but finally they began to fade. The horses moved off. The voices grew distant and the desert settled back into its ancient silence. The warrior remained motionless for several more minutes, listening. Then he relaxed fractionally and stepped back from the wall. Without a word, he gestured for Evelyn to follow and began working his way deeper into the crevice. It widened after about 20 feet, opening into a small, natural chamber, barely large enough for 2 people to sit. The warrior guided Evelyn to a relatively flat section of stone, and she collapsed onto it gratefully, every inch of her body throbbing with pain. He crouched nearby, still watchful, listening to the night. After a moment, he pulled a leather pouch from his belt, opened it, and held it out to her. Water. Evelyn took it with shaking hands and drank deeply. The water was warm and tasted faintly of leather, but it was the most delicious thing she'd ever experienced. She had to force herself to stop before she drained it, completely, handing it back with a whispered, "Thank you." The warrior took a small drink himself, then stoppered the pouch and set it aside. He pulled another pouch from his belt, this one containing what looked like dried meat, and offered her a piece. Evelyn took it, though the thought of eating made her stomach turn. She nibbled at it anyway, knowing she needed the strength. It was tougher than jerky, saltier, with a smoky flavor she couldn't identify. Not bad exactly, just unfamiliar. They sat in silence, this strange, impossible pair, the runaway heiress and the Apache warrior who'd saved her life for reasons she couldn't begin to understand. The blanket around Evelyn's shoulders smelled like smoke and sage and safety, and for the first time since she'd climbed out her bedroom window 3 nights ago, she felt the terror recede enough to think. She studied her rescuer in the faint moonlight filtering through the crevice. He was younger than she'd first thought, mid-20s maybe, though the scars and the hardness in his eyes made him seem older. His face was all sharp angles and fierce concentration, constantly scanning for threats. "Who are you?" she asked softly. He glanced at her but didn't answer. Maybe he really didn't speak English, or maybe he simply saw no point in names. "I'm Evelyn," she tried anyway, touching her chest. "Evelyn Carter." The warrior watched her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he touched his own chest and said in a voice rough from disuse or injury, a single word, "Kael." Evelyn felt something crack open inside her chest. Relief, gratitude, something deeper she couldn't name. "Kael," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "Thank you, Kael. You saved my life." Kael nodded once, acknowledging the truth of it, then turned back to watching the entrance. The conversation, such as it was, appeared to be over. Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter around herself and allowed her eyes to close, just for a moment. Just to rest. She was so tired, so broken, and the stone beneath her was surprisingly warm. The sound of Kael's breathing was steady, reliable, a rhythm she could anchor herself to. She meant to stay awake, to remain vigilant, but exhaustion pulled her under, like dark water, and she surrendered to it without a fight. Her last conscious thought was simple and profound. "I'm alive, I'm still alive," and that for tonight was enough. When Evelyn woke, the sun was a pale promise on the eastern horizon, painting the desert in shades of rose and gold. For a moment she didn't remember where she was, why every part of her body hurt, why she was wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket instead of silk sheets. Then memory returned in a rush. The escape, the chase, the ambush. "Kael." She sat up quickly, too quickly, and gasped as pain lanced through her ribs. Kael was immediately there, a steadying hand on her shoulder, his face creased with concern. "I'm okay," Evelyn managed. "Just sore. Everything's just sore." Kael nodded and released her, settling back on his heels. In the morning light she could see him more and more clearly. The scars were even more extensive than she'd realized, not just on his face and shoulder, but crisscrossing his arms, disappearing under his shirt. These were the marks of someone who'd survived things that would have killed most men. He was watching her with the same intensity he'd shown the night before, but there was something else in his expression now, not quite concern, but awareness. He saw her pain, understood it, and it mattered to him. "We need to move," he said, the English heavily accented but clear. "They will search again with more men." Evelyn nodded, trying to stand. Her legs nearly buckled, but Kael caught her, supporting her weight with surprising gentleness. When she'd steadied, he released her and moved to the chamber entrance, checking that it was safe. "Where are we going?" Evelyn asked. Kael glanced back at her. "Away from them, into the mountains. They will not follow there." "Why not?" Something dark flickered across his face. Apache land. They fear it. He said it simply, without pride or bitterness, just stating a fact. White men feared Apache territory because Apache warriors killed white men who entered uninvited. The mathematics of survival were that simple. Will your people... Evelyn hesitated, trying to find the right words. Will they accept me if I'm with you? Kael studied her for a long moment. We will not go to my people. They cannot help. We are alone. The word we settled into Evelyn's chest, like a stone, heavy and solid and real. We, not you or I, but we, as if their fates were already bound together. Why are you helping me? She asked again, needing to understand. You don't know me. I'm white. I'm everything your people have fought against. Kael's jaw tightened. When he spoke, his voice was low and hard. My sister. White men took her 2 winters ago. She was 14. He met Evelyn's eyes directly. They said she was property too. The air left Evelyn's lungs in a rush. Kael, I'm so sorry. I didn't... You ran, he interrupted. She could not. You are not them. It wasn't forgiveness. Evelyn didn't fool herself about that. It was something simpler and more profound recognition. He saw in her the same desperate flight his sister had never managed. He saw someone who'd chosen freedom over comfort, morality over money. He saw someone worth saving. I'll try not to slow you down, Evelyn said quietly. Kael's expression softened fractionally, not quite a smile, but something approaching warmth. He reached into his pack and pulled out a pair of rough leather moccasins, clearly made for someone much larger than Evelyn. He handed them to her. Your feet. They will not last. Evelyn took the moccasins with shaking hands. They were worn, soft, with use, the leather supple and comfortable despite being too big. She slipped them on, and the relief was immediate, the raw wounds on her feet protected at last. Thank you, she whispered. Kael nodded and moved to the chamber entrance. We go now. Stay close. If I signal... He made a sharp downward gesture. You drop. No sound. Understand. I understand. And so they began their journey into the wilderness. The runaway heiress and the exiled warrior, moving through a landscape that wanted them both dead for different reasons. Behind them the sun rose higher, burning away the gentle morning colors and replacing them with harsh, unforgiving light. Reed and his men would be searching. Webb would be furious. The army, because of course Webb would call in the army, claiming Evelyn had been kidnapped by savages, would be mobilizing. But for now, for this moment, there was only the desert, the path ahead, and the impossible alliance between two people who should have been enemies but had instead become each other's only hope for survival. Evelyn adjusted the blanket around her shoulders and followed Kael into the unknown, each step carrying her further from everything she'd ever known and closer to something she couldn't yet name but desperately needed to find. Behind them, far in the distance, came the sound of horses and men shouting. The hunt had begun again, but this time Evelyn wasn't running alone. They walked until Evelyn thought her legs would simply stop working, until the moccasins Kael had given her were dark with blood from wounds that had reopened, until the sun climbed so high it felt like a physical weight pressing down on her skull. Kael moved ahead of her, tireless and silent, occasionally glancing back to make sure she was still following. He never asked if she needed to rest. He simply stopped when her breathing became too ragged, allowed her 5 minutes in whatever shade they could find, then moved on. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed into the foothills, loose scree that shifted treacherously underfoot, thorny brush that caught at Evelyn's dress and tore new holes in the fabric. Twice they had to backtrack when the path ahead became impassable, and each time Evelyn felt the panic rising. They were losing time, leaving more tracks, making themselves easier to follow. But Kael seemed unconcerned. He moved with absolute confidence, reading the land in ways Evelyn couldn't begin to understand. Once he stopped, suddenly crouched down, and spent several minutes studying the ground. Then he stood, made a small adjustment to their direction, and continued on. "What did you see?" Evelyn asked, her voice hoarse. "Mountain lion," Kael said, without looking back. "Hunting, 2 days old. How can you possibly tell that?" He glanced at her then, and something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "The same way you tell expensive silk from cheap cotton." It was the longest sentence he'd spoken to her, and despite everything, the pain, the fear, the exhaustion, Evelyn felt herself smile. Fair enough. They continued in silence, but something had shifted. The quiet between them felt less like distance and more like companionship. Evelyn found herself watching Kael more closely, noticing things she'd missed in the chaos of the night before. The way he moved was like nothing she'd ever seen. Not the aggressive swagger of men like Reed or Webb, but something more fundamental, economical. Every step placed with precision, every movement purposeful. He wasted nothing, not energy, not time, not words. It made her acutely aware of her own clumsiness, the way she stumbled and gasped, and generally announced her presence to everything within a mile radius. But Kael never showed impatience. When she fell behind, he simply waited. When she tripped and nearly went down, his hand was there to steady her before she even realized she was falling. By mid-afternoon, they'd reached a narrow canyon that cut deep into the mountains. A thin stream ran along its bottom, the water so clear, Evelyn could see every stone on its bed. Kael led her to a spot where the canyon walls created a natural alcove, hidden from above and defensible from below. "We rest here," he said, "until dark." Evelyn nearly collapsed with relief. She made her way to the stream and knelt beside it, cupping water to her mouth with trembling hands. It was cold and sweet, tasting of stone and sky. She drank until her stomach ached, then splashed water on her face, washing away layers of dust and dried blood. When she looked up, Kael was watching her with that same intense focus, not threatening but assessing, making calculations she couldn't guess at. "What?" she asked. "You are stronger than I thought," he said simply. "Most white women would be crying by now, begging to go back." "I'd rather die than go back," Evelyn said, and meant it. "What they're doing, what Webb and my father and all the rest of them are doing, it's evil. I won't be part of it." Kael's expression shifted, something dark and painful moving behind his eyes. He looked away toward the canyon entrance, silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. "The men who took my sister, they worked for mining companies, taking Apache prisoners after battles, after surrenders, saying they would take us to reservations to safety. Instead," he stopped, his jaw clenched so tight Evelyn could see the muscles jumping. "Instead, they took us underground, made us dig until we died. My sister lasted 3 months. I lasted 6 before I escaped." The words fell between them like stones into deep water. Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest, not just sympathy but recognition. The same evil she'd overheard Webb planning, the same machinery of profit built on broken bodies and mass graves. It wasn't abstract anymore. It had a face, a name, a sister who'd been 14 years old. "Kael," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know my father. He never told me. Your father knew," Kael said flatly. "All the white railroad men know. They pay for it. They profit from it." He finally looked at her again, and his eyes were hard. "But you ran. So maybe you are different." "I want to be different," Evelyn said. "I want to stop them. I just don't know how." "You stopped them by staying alive," Kael said. "By not letting them take you back. By not becoming Mrs. Webb." He said the name like a curse. "That is how you fight them." Evelyn nodded slowly, understanding. It wasn't much of a revolution, one woman refusing to participate in evil, but it was something. It was all she had. "Then I'll stay alive," she said, "and I won't go back, no matter what." Kael held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded satisfied. He moved to the alcove and began unpacking his small bundle of supplies, more dried meat, a leather pouch of something that looked like ground corn, a fire kit wrapped in oiled cloth. He worked with the same efficient grace he brought to everything, his hands quick and sure. Evelyn watched him for a moment, then forced herself to stand. Her body protested every movement, but she couldn't just sit there being useless. "What can I do to help?" Kael glanced at her, surprised. "You need to rest." "I need to be useful," Evelyn corrected. "Otherwise, I'm just dead weight you're dragging through the desert. So what can I do?" Something shifted in Kael's expression, not quite approval, but close. "Gather stones, flat ones, for the fire ring." It was simple work, but it gave Evelyn something to focus on, besides the pain. She moved along the stream bed, selecting stones that seemed right, carrying them back to where Kael was clearing a space for the fire. It took her 3 trips to gather enough, and by the end her hands were shaking with exhaustion, but she'd done it. Kael arranged the stones in a circle, then used his knife to scrape a small depression in the center. He was working on starting the fire when Evelyn noticed the wound on his shoulder, the one she'd glimpsed the night before. In daylight, it looked worse. The fabric of his shirt was stiff with dried blood, and the skin around it was inflamed. "You're hurt," she said. Kael didn't look up from the fire he was building. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing. It could get infected." "When did it happen?" 3 days ago. A patrol. I killed 2, escaped the rest. 1 got lucky with a knife." 3 days ago, and he'd been living rough in the desert, bleeding and fighting, and now protecting her without complaint. Evelyn felt shame wash through her. She'd been so focused on her own pain, her own fear, that she hadn't even noticed he was wounded. "Let me look at it," she said. "No need." "Kael." She moved closer, making her voice firm. "You saved my life. The least I can do is clean your wound before it kills you. Please." He finally looked at her, studying her face. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded once and began unlacing his shirt. He pulled it off carefully, and Evelyn had to work not to gasp at what she saw. The scars she'd glimpsed before covered most of his torso, long lines where whips had cut circular burns from irons or cigars, and other marks she couldn't identify, but which spoke of deliberate, systematic torture. The mining camps, she realized. They'd done this to him in the mining camps. For 6 months he'd endured this and somehow survived. The fresh wound on his shoulder was a deep gash, maybe 3 inches long, held partially closed by what looked like dried plant matter. It needed real care, stitching probably, or at least proper bandaging, but it could have been worse. At least it wasn't showing signs of serious infection yet. "I need to clean it," Evelyn said, keeping her voice steady. "It's going to hurt." "Everything hurts," Kael said simply. "Do what you need to do." Evelyn tore a piece from her already ruined dress and soaked it in the stream. The water was cold and clean, better than nothing. She moved back to Kael and began cleaning the wound as gently as she could, washing away the dried blood and plant matter. Kael sat perfectly still, his breathing steady and controlled, showing no sign of pain, even though Evelyn knew this had to hurt, like fire. She worked carefully, trying to be thorough without causing unnecessary suffering. As she worked, she became aware of how close they were. Close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin, smell the smoke and sage scent that clung to him, see the small details she'd missed before. The way his hair was growing out from where someone had tried to cut it short in the camps. The tattoos on his forearms, traditional Apache markings that looked like they'd been done years ago before everything fell apart. "Why did you help me?" she asked quietly, not looking up from her work. "Really, it wasn't just because of your sister. You could have let Reed take me. It would have been easier, safer for you." Kael was silent for so long Evelyn thought he wouldn't answer. Then finally, "When I escaped the mines, I ran for 3 days. No food, no water, nothing, just running. On the 3rd night, I collapsed. Thought I was going to die. Then an old woman found me, not Apache, not even from a friendly tribe, but she gave me water, gave me food, hid me from the patrol that was hunting me. When I asked why, she said, 'Because you are not dead yet, so you must have something left to do.'" He paused, and when he continued, his voice was softer. When I saw you last night running from those men, I thought of my sister, but I also thought of that old woman. You are not dead yet. Maybe you have something left to do, so I helped." Evelyn's hands stilled. She looked up at him, and for the first time since they'd met, he looked back without that wall of controlled distance. Just for a moment, she saw past the warrior, past the scars and the violence and the carefully maintained survival instinct. She saw a man who'd lost everything and somehow found a reason to keep fighting anyway. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt inadequate but true, "for seeing something in me worth saving." "You saw it first," Kael said, "when you ran from that life. That took courage." Evelyn shook her head. "It took desperation. I didn't have anywhere else to go. Neither did I when I ran from the mines, but we both did it anyway. That is courage, choosing freedom when the only other choice is death." She finished cleaning the wound and tore another strip from her dress to bind it. The fabric wasn't ideal, but it was clean and it would have to do. As she wrapped it around his shoulder, her fingers brushed against his skin, and she felt him tense slightly, not pulling away, but aware. "There," she said, tying off the bandage. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing." "It's good," Kael said, rolling his shoulder carefully. "Thank you." He pulled his shirt back on, and the moment of vulnerability passed, but something had changed between them. The silence that fell now wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, of shared recognition. They were both running from things that wanted to destroy them. They were both choosing survival when giving up would have been easier. They were both, in their own ways, already free. Kael got the fire started as the afternoon faded toward evening. It was a small fire, carefully built to produce minimal smoke, but it was warm and welcoming after the day's heat turned to desert chill. He mixed the ground corn with water and cooked it into a thin porridge, then divided it between them. It wasn't much, but Evelyn ate every bite, feeling strength slowly returning to her exhausted body. As darkness settled over the canyon, they sat on opposite sides of the fire, listening to the night sounds. An owl called from somewhere above. The stream whispered over stones. In the distance, a coyote sang its lonely song. "Do you think they're still looking for us?" Evelyn asked. "Yes," Kael said, "but they are looking in the wrong places. They think you will run toward Mexico, toward towns and people. They do not know you are with someone who knows how to disappear. How long can we keep disappearing?" Kael fed another stick to the fire. "As long as we need to. The desert is large. The mountains are larger. They cannot search forever." "But we can't run forever either," Evelyn said quietly. "Eventually we'll run out of supplies, or they'll get lucky, or eventually we reach the hidden places," Kael interrupted. "Places where the white men do not go because they cannot find them. Places where we can rest, heal, decide what comes next." "What does come next?" He looked at her across the flames. "I do not know. For a long time I thought there was nothing next. Just surviving one more day, then another, but maybe—" He stopped, considering his words. "Maybe surviving is not the same as living. Maybe there is something else." Evelyn understood what he was saying, what he couldn't quite articulate. She'd felt it too, the way simply existing, simply going through the motions of a life that had been chosen for her had felt like a kind of death. Running might be dangerous and painful and terrifying, but at least it was real. At least she was making her own choices. "I don't want to just survive either," she said. "I want to live, really live, whatever that means." "Then we will find out together," Kael said, and it wasn't a question or a promise, just a simple statement of fact. They fell into comfortable silence after that, the fire crackling between them. Evelyn felt her eyelids growing heavy despite her best efforts to stay alert. Her body was demanding rest, proper rest, the kind of deep sleep she hadn't had since this all began. "You should sleep," Kael said, noticing her struggle. "I will keep watch." "You need sleep too," Evelyn protested. "You're hurt, and you've been—" "I am used to it," Kael said simply. "I will sleep later. For now, you need rest more than I do." Evelyn wanted to argue, but she was too exhausted to make it convincing. She lay down near the fire, pulling Kael's blanket around herself. The ground was hard and the night sounds were strange, but she felt safer than she had in her own bed back at the estate. Because here in this narrow canyon with a fire and a warrior who'd killed for her survival, she wasn't property. She wasn't a pawn in someone else's game. She was just Evelyn, free, alive, choosing her own path. Her last thought before sleep took her was simple and profound. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight, Kael sat watch, silent and steady as stone, keeping the night at bay. And for the first time since this desperate flight began, Evelyn didn't dream of being caught. She dreamed of mountains and endless sky, of places where no one could find her, of a future that was hers to write. When she woke, the sky was still dark, but beginning to lighten in the east. Kael was exactly where he'd been when she fell asleep, still watching, still vigilant. He glanced at her as she stirred. "We move soon," he said quietly. "Before the sun, they will search at dawn." Evelyn nodded and sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. Everything hurt, but it was a different kind of hurt now, the ache of work, of pushing her body to its limits, and discovering it could go further than she'd imagined. Kael handed her the water pouch and the last of the dried meat. "Eat, drink, then we go." As Evelyn ate, she watched him pack up their small camp with practiced efficiency. He erased all signs of the fire, scattered the stones, even brushed away their footprints around the alcove. Within minutes, it looked like they'd never been there at all. "How did you learn all this?" she asked. "The tracking, the hiding, the everything." "My father," Kael said, not looking up from his work. "He taught me before the soldiers came, before the camps. He said, learn to be invisible, learn to be the desert. That is how you survive when everything else is taken away." He paused, something painful crossing his face. He was right. "Is he dead? 3 years ago, the camps." Kael's voice was flat, emotionless, but Evelyn heard the grief underneath. "My mother, my sister, my father, all dead. I am the only one left." The words hung in the air like smoke. Evelyn didn't know what to say, what comfort she could possibly offer that wouldn't sound hollow and useless. So she simply said what was true. "I'm sorry for all of it, for everything my people have done to yours." Kael looked at her, then really looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "You are not responsible for what they did. You are only responsible for what you do, and you ran from them. You chose a different path. That matters." It was the most he'd said about her choice, about why he'd helped her, and Evelyn felt tears burning behind her eyes. She blinked them away angrily. This wasn't the time for crying. This was the time for moving forward. "Then let's keep choosing it," she said, standing up. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." Kael nodded once satisfied. He shouldered his pack and gestured towards the canyon entrance. "Together then, but quietly. And if I signal, I drop. No sound, I remember." They moved out of the canyon as the first light of dawn began painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Behind them, the fire ring was just scattered stones. Their footprints were just marks in the dust that the morning wind would soon erase. They left no trace of their passing, nothing for Reed and his hunters to find. They were ghosts in the desert shadows that disappeared at dawn. And somewhere far behind them, men were searching in all the wrong places, never guessing that the woman they hunted had found the one guide who could make her truly vanish. The hunt continued, but the hunted had learned how to become invisible, and in that invisibility they found something neither had expected: hope. They had been climbing for 3 days when Kael stopped suddenly, his hand raised in warning. Evelyn froze mid-step, her heart already racing before her mind could process why. She'd learned to trust his instincts absolutely. When Kael sensed danger, danger was there, even if she couldn't see it yet. They were deep in the mountains now, following a narrow trail that wound between towering rock faces. The air was thinner here, harder to breathe, and Evelyn's lungs burned with every step. But the altitude was their ally. Fewer men would follow them this high, and those who did would be slowed by the same breathless exhaustion that plagued her. Kael crouched low, gesturing for her to do the same. She dropped immediately, pressing herself against the rough stone wall. He moved forward with agonizing slowness, peering around a jutting outcrop. Then he went completely still, and Evelyn saw his hand move to the knife at his belt. That's when she heard it, the distant sound of horses, many horses, and voices shouting commands in English. "They're ahead of us," Kael whispered, moving back to her position. His face was grim. "At least 20 men. Soldiers, not just Reed's mercenaries. They've blocked the pass." Evelyn's stomach dropped. How did they know we'd come this way? They didn't. They're blocking all the passes. Your father must have called in the cavalry. They have enough men to cover every route out of the territory. He was thinking fast, his eyes scanning the terrain around them. "They're waiting for us to walk into the trap. Can we go back? Find another way?" Kael shook his head. "Reed's men are behind us. I saw their dust 2 hours ago. They're driving us toward the soldiers like game toward a hunter's rifle." They were caught, boxed in between two forces with nowhere left to run. Evelyn felt panic clawing at her throat, but she forced it down. Panic wouldn't save them, only clear thinking and whatever desperate courage they could muster. "What do we do?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Kael studied the canyon walls, his jaw tight. "There's a way, narrow, dangerous. The cliff face has a crack that runs almost to the rim. I saw it from below, thought it might be climbable." "How narrow?" "Barely wide enough for one person, and it's 100-foot drop if you fall." He looked at her directly. "Can you climb?" Evelyn thought of the trees she'd climbed as a child, before her mother had decided such behavior was unladylike. She thought of the trellis outside her bedroom window that she'd used to escape 3 nights ago. She thought of everything she'd survived so far. "I can climb," she said. Something flickered in Kael's eyes, respect maybe, or admiration. "Then we climb. Now, before they realize we're here." He led her back down the trail 50 yards to where the crack in the cliff face began. Up close it looked even more treacherous than he'd described, a vertical fissure barely wide enough to fit her shoulders with handholds that looked dubious at best. The drop below was dizzying. "I'll go first," Kael said, already testing the first holds. "Watch where I place my hands and feet. Do exactly the same. Don't look down. Don't think about the height. Just focus on the next hold, then the next. Understand?" Evelyn nodded, not trusting her voice. Kael began to climb. He moved with the same fluid grace he brought to everything, finding holds that Evelyn could barely see, pressing himself into the crack and using the opposing walls for leverage. He made it look almost easy, though she could see the strain in his muscles, the careful placement of every movement. After about 20 feet, he stopped and looked down. "Your turn. Take your time. I'll talk you through it." Evelyn reached for the first handhold, a narrow ledge about head height. Her fingers found purchase and she pulled herself up, her feet scrabbling for the holds Kael had used. The stone was rough against her palms, biting into skin that was already raw from days in the desert. "Good," Kael called down quietly. "Now your right foot, see that small ridge? Put your weight on it slowly. Test it first." She did, and the stone held. One hold at a time she climbed, following Kael's path exactly. Her world narrowed to just the rock in front of her face, the next handhold, the next foothold. The sounds of the soldiers below faded into background noise, less important than the burning in her arms and the racing of her heart. Halfway up, her foot slipped. For one terrifying second she was falling, her hands scrabbling desperately at the rock. Then Kael's hand shot down impossibly fast and grabbed her wrist. His grip was like iron, holding her entire weight with one arm while he braced himself in the crack. "I've got you," he said, his voice steady despite the strain. "Find your footing. Take your time." Evelyn's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. She forced herself to breathe, to think, to move her feet carefully until she found a solid hold. Only then did Kael release her wrist. "Thank you," she gasped. "Keep climbing, you're doing well." The rest of the ascent passed in a blur of pain and terror and desperate focus. By the time she pulled herself over the rim, her arms were shaking so badly she could barely hold on. She collapsed on solid ground, gasping, while Kael hauled himself up beside her with infuriating ease. "We need to move," he said, not even breathing hard. "They'll have scouts on the rim too." But as they stood, a voice rang out across the canyon. "There, on the cliff. 2 people. It's them." The trap had been sprung. Gunfire exploded from below, bullets whining off the rocks around them. Kael grabbed Evelyn's hand and ran, pulling her away from the rim. They sprinted across the rocky plateau, bullets kicking up dust at their heels. More shouts echoed from somewhere ahead, the scouts Kael had predicted converging on their position. They were running directly into another ambush, but there was no choice. Behind them meant the cliff. To either side meant dead ends. Forward was the only option, even if forward meant straight into danger. The plateau narrowed into another canyon, this one deeper and darker than the last. Kael pulled her into it without hesitation, and they ran through the shadows while gunfire echoed off the stone walls. The sound was deafening, disorienting, making it impossible to tell where the shots were coming from. A bullet caught the rock inches from Evelyn's head, and she felt the sting of stone fragments against her cheek. She stumbled, but Kael's grip kept her upright, kept her moving. They rounded a bend and nearly ran straight into 3 soldiers coming the other way. For a frozen instant, everyone stared at each other in surprise. Then Kael moved. His knife flashed once, twice, and 2 soldiers went down before they could raise their rifles. The third managed to get a shot off. The bullet went wide, ricocheting off stone before Kael was on him. They went down in a tangle of limbs, fighting for control of the rifle. Evelyn stood frozen, watching the violence unfold with horrified fascination. She'd never seen men fight like this, not the staged boxing matches at her father's parties, but real combat, desperate and brutal and fast. Kael fought like the desert itself, hard, unforgiving, and absolutely committed to survival. The soldier got his hands around Kael's throat. Kael drove his knee up, breaking the hold, then grabbed the man's head and slammed it against the rock once, twice, until the soldier went limp. Kael stood breathing hard blood on his hands. He grabbed the fallen rifle and turned to Evelyn. "Can you shoot?" She shook her head, unable to find words. "You're going to learn." He pressed the rifle into her shaking hands. "It's loaded. Safety's off. Point it at anything that moves and pull the trigger. Don't think, don't hesitate, just shoot." "Kael, I can't." "You can." His hands closed over hers on the rifle, steadying them. "Listen to me. Those men will kill me and take you back to become Webb's wife. That future, everything you ran from, it's right behind us. So you can shoot or you can surrender. Choose." The words cut through her panic like ice water. He was right. There was no middle ground here, no option where she got to keep her hands clean and her conscience clear. This was survival, raw and terrible, and it demanded everything from her. "I'll shoot," she whispered. "Good." He released her hands. "Stay close to me. Do exactly what I say. We're going to fight our way out of this canyon." They moved deeper into the ravine, Kael leading with the soldier's knife in one hand and his own knife in the other, Evelyn following with the rifle clutched to her chest. The sounds of pursuit were all around them now, boots on stone, orders being shouted, the metallic click of rifles being readied. The canyon opened into a wider space, a natural amphitheater of stone with exits on 3 sides. Kael stopped assessing the terrain, looking for the best route out. That's when the first shot rang out from above. The bullet hit the ground between them, kicking up a spray of dust. Evelyn looked up and saw soldiers on the rim, at least 6 of them, rifles aimed down into the canyon. They had the high ground, and they had numbers, and they had her and Kael trapped like animals in a pit. "Down!" Kael shouted, diving behind a boulder. Evelyn threw herself flat as a volley of shots rang out bullets, sparking off stone all around them. She pressed herself into the dirt, the rifle trapped beneath her terror, turning her blood to ice. More soldiers were pouring into the canyon from the other exits surrounding them. She could see Reed among them, his face grim with satisfaction, and beside him, in an expensive suit that looked absurd in the desert, was Marcus Webb himself. "Miss Carter," Webb's voice echoed across the canyon, smooth and cultured. "This is foolish. You're only going to get yourself killed. Come out peacefully and I promise no one else has to die." "He's lying," Kael said, quietly crouched beside her behind the boulder. "They'll kill me the moment you surrender. Probably claim I kidnapped you, attacked you, use my death to justify the next raid on Apache land." Evelyn knew he was right. She'd seen how this worked, how men like Webb twisted every event to serve their purposes, how truth became whatever story they needed to tell. "So what do we do?" she asked. Kael looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something she'd never expected. Not fear, but a kind of fierce, desperate determination. "We fight. We make them pay for every inch. And if we die free. Together." He said it so simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And maybe it was. Maybe freedom and death were the same thing when the alternative was a life in chains. "Together," Evelyn agreed. Kael smiled, then a real smile that transformed his scarred face. "You are stronger than they thought. Stronger than I thought." He checked the knives in his hands. "When I move, you cover me. Point the rifle at the men on the rim and shoot. You don't have to hit them, just make them duck. Give me time to reach that outcrop. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good. On 3. 1, wait." Evelyn grabbed his arm. "If we don't make it out of this, we will. But if we don't, I want you to know." She struggled for words. "Thank you. For everything. For seeing me as more than just a runaway white girl. For treating me like I mattered." Kael's expression softened. "You do matter. You always did. That's why I helped you. That's why I'm still here." He touched her face briefly, a gesture so gentle it seemed impossible from hands that had just killed 3 men. "Ready," she nodded. 3, Kael exploded from behind the boulder, running in a zigzag pattern toward a larger outcrop that offered better cover. Evelyn rose to her knees, raised the rifle with shaking hands, and pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her backward. The shot went wild, hitting the canyon wall 20 feet from the nearest soldier. But it was enough. The men on the rim ducked their return fire, delayed by a crucial second. Kael made it to the outcrop and immediately returned fire with the rifle he'd taken from the first soldier. "Move!" he shouted. Evelyn ran, clutching her rifle, as bullets chewed up the ground around her. She didn't think, didn't plan, just ran toward Kael like he was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. A bullet tugged at her dress. Another whined past her ear so close she felt the displaced air. Then she was diving behind the outcrop, her heart trying to hammer its way out of her chest. "You did good," Kael said, already firing at targets she couldn't see. "Next time, aim for the men, not the rocks." "There's going to be a next time. Many next times. We're far from done." He ducked as a bullet sparked off the rock above his head. "See that narrow passage on the far side? That's our way out. But we need to make them think we're staying here, get them to commit to this position." "How do we do that?" Kael handed her his knife. "If anyone gets close, use this. Don't hesitate. Don't aim for anything fancy. Just stick it in them and twist. Understand?" Evelyn took the knife, feeling the weight of it, the reality of what he was asking. "I understand." For the next several minutes, they fought like cornered animals, desperate, fierce, and absolutely committed to survival. Kael fired methodically, making every shot count, while Evelyn learned through sheer necessity how to reload under fire, how to spot targets, how to shoot without freezing up. She didn't hit much, but she was learning. A soldier tried to flank them, coming around the outcrop from the side. Evelyn saw him too late to shoot. He lunged for her, and without thinking, she drove the knife into his stomach, just like Kael had said. The man's eyes went wide with shock and pain. He collapsed, and Evelyn stared at the bloody knife in her hand, at the life she'd just taken, and felt something break and reform inside her. She'd killed someone, taken a human life. She should feel horror, guilt, revulsion. Instead, she felt a cold, clear certainty she would do it again if she had to. She would do whatever it took to survive, to keep Kael alive, to stay free. Evelyn, Kael's voice cut through her shock. We move now. Are you with me? She looked at him, at this warrior who'd taught her to be stronger than she'd ever imagined, and nodded. I'm with you. They ran for the narrow passage, firing as they moved, and the canyon erupted into chaos behind them. Soldiers shouted, bullets flew, and somewhere Marcus Webb was screaming orders that no one could hear over the gunfire. The passage was barely wide enough for Evelyn's shoulders, a crack in the rock that led into darkness. She squeezed through it, feeling stones scrape her arms, while Kael covered their retreat. A bullet caught him just as he reached the entrance. She saw him jerk, saw blood bloom from his left side, but he kept moving, kept fighting. Kael, keep going. He shoved her deeper into the passage. Don't stop. They stumbled through the darkness, following the crack as it twisted and turned. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit echoed off stone, growing fainter. The passage was too narrow for most of the soldiers to follow quickly. They'd have to go one at a time, which gave Kael and Evelyn precious seconds. The crack widened, suddenly opening into another canyon. This one was smaller, steeper, with walls that glowed red in the setting sun, beautiful and terrible like everything else in this desert. Kael collapsed against the canyon wall, his hand pressed to his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark and thick. How bad? Evelyn asked, already tearing at her dress for bandages. Bad enough. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. But I'll live if we keep moving. You're not moving anywhere until I stop that bleeding. Evelyn, they're right behind. I don't care. She pressed the wadded fabric against his wound, and he hissed in pain. You've saved my life 12 times. Now it's my turn, so shut up and let me work. Despite everything, Kael laughed, a weak, pained sound, but genuine. Yes, ma'am. She worked quickly, binding the wound as tightly as she could with the makeshift bandages. It wasn't enough. Not really, but it would have to do. The blood was already soaking through, but at least it wasn't gushing anymore. Can you walk? She asked. I can run if I have to. He pushed himself upright, wincing. But not for long. We need shelter, a place to make a stand. There, Evelyn pointed up the canyon. That looks like a cave entrance. If we can reach it, we can defend it. Kael looked where she was pointing and nodded. Good eyes, help me up. She got her shoulder under his arm, taking as much of his weight as she could, and they began the painful climb up the canyon floor. Behind them, she could hear the soldiers working their way through the narrow passage, shouting to each other. They had maybe 5 minutes before the first men emerged. The cave entrance was smaller than it had looked from below, but it was deep and defensible. Evelyn helped Kael inside and settled him against the back wall. He was breathing hard, his face gray with pain and blood loss. Give me the rifle, he said. Kael, you can barely sit up. Then I'll shoot lying down. He held out his hand. They're coming, Evelyn. I can still fight. She gave him the rifle and took the knife he offered in return. Together they waited at the cave entrance while the sun sank toward the horizon and their enemies climbed toward them through the blood-red canyon. This was it, the final stand, win or die. But as Evelyn crouched there in the dying light, Kael bleeding beside her and soldiers approaching below, she felt no regret. She'd chosen this. Every step of the way, she'd chosen freedom over safety, truth over lies, life over the slow death of being Marcus Webb's obedient wife. Whatever came next, she'd face it with her eyes open and her conscience clear. The first soldier appeared at the canyon entrance. Kael fired, and the battle for Blood Canyon began. The soldier went down before he even knew what hit him. Kael's shot was perfect despite his wounds, despite the blood loss that made his hands shake. The man crumpled and the others scattered, taking cover behind the rocks at the canyon entrance. "How many rounds left?" Evelyn asked, her voice steadier than she felt. 4, maybe 5. Kael's breathing was labored, each word an effort. Not enough. Not enough to hold off 20 men. Not enough to survive this. They both knew it, but neither said it aloud. Saying it would make it real, and they needed hope more than truth right now. The sun was setting fast, painting the canyon in shades of blood and fire. Smoke drifted up from somewhere below. They'd set fire to the scrub brush, trying to smoke them out, or simply destroy any cover. The smell was acrid, burning Evelyn's throat with every breath. "Miss Carter," Reed's voice echoed up from below. "This is your last chance. The Apache is finished. He's bleeding out even as we speak. Surrender now, and I give you my word you'll be treated fairly." "Your word means nothing," Evelyn shouted back, surprising herself with the fury in her voice. "You hunt people like animals. You sell them into slavery. There's nothing fair about any of you." A bullet spanged off the rock above her head in response. Evelyn ducked back into the cave, her heart racing. "You shouldn't have done that," Kael said, but there was approval in his eyes. "Now they know you're not coming quietly." "I was never coming quietly." She moved to his side, checking the bandage on his wound. It was soaked through and fresh blood was seeping around the edges. "How are you really feeling?" "Like I've been shot." He managed a weak smile. "But I've been worse. The mines, they did things that made this feel like nothing." "Don't lie to me, not now." He looked at her, then really looked at her, and the mask of strength he'd been wearing cracked just slightly. "I'm dying, Evelyn. Maybe not in the next hour, but soon. That bullet went deep. I can feel it." He touched her face gently. "But I'll hold on long enough to get you out of here." "No." The word came out fierce, absolute. "I'm not leaving you. We escape together or not at all." "That's not—" "I mean it, Kael." She grabbed his hand, holding tight. "You told me freedom was choosing your own path, even when death was the alternative. Well, this is my choice. I'm not going back without you. I won't survive alone, and even if I could, I don't want to." Something shifted in his expression. Pain, yes, but also something deeper. Gratitude, maybe, or recognition. "You really mean that?" "Every word." "Then we need a new plan." He looked toward the cave entrance, thinking, despite the pain that was clearly overwhelming him, "They'll wait until full dark, then rush us. They have the numbers to overwhelm any defense, so we don't wait for them." "What do you mean?" "We leave. Now, while they're still getting into position." He pointed to the back of the cave. "This goes deeper than it looks. Feel that air current? There's another way out." Evelyn felt it now, a faint breeze coming from somewhere in the darkness behind them. A passage maybe leading up and out, or leading nowhere, ending in solid rock, trapping them. "It's a chance," Kael said, reading her hesitation. "Maybe our only one, but I need you to help me. I can't make it on my own." "Then we go together." Evelyn got her shoulder under his arm again, taking his weight. He was heavier now, less able to support himself, and she could feel him trembling with effort. "Can you walk?" "For you, I can fly." He was joking, trying to lighten the moment, but his voice was weak and his grip on her shoulder was desperate. They moved deeper into the cave, leaving the rifle behind. It was empty anyway, and they needed both hands for climbing. The darkness swallowed them quickly, absolute and complete. Evelyn felt her way forward, one hand on the cave wall, the other supporting Kael, moving by feel and faith, and the thin thread of hope that this passage led somewhere other than their graves. The cave narrowed, forcing them to turn sideways, then narrowed again until Evelyn thought they might get stuck. Kael was breathing in short, pained gasps behind her, but he kept moving, kept fighting. She could feel his blood soaking through her dress, where he leaned against her, warm and sticky. "There," he whispered, "look up." Evelyn looked and saw stars. Just a crack, a narrow fissure in the rock above them, but definitely stars. An exit. "Can you climb?" she asked. "Can you pull me?" It wasn't really an answer, but it was all she was going to get. Evelyn studied the chimney-like passage above them. It was narrow enough that she could brace herself between the walls, climbing with her back against one side and her feet against the other, but pulling Kael's weight at the same time. "I can do it," she said, making it true by saying it. She positioned herself in the chimney and started to climb, bracing and pushing inch by painful inch. Kael climbed below her, using what strength he had left. And when he faltered, she grabbed his wrist and pulled, hauling him up through sheer force of will and desperation. Every muscle in her body screamed. Her legs shook with effort. Her hands were slick with Kael's blood, and her own where the rough stone tore at her palms. But she kept climbing, kept pulling, because the alternative was staying in that cave until the soldiers found them, or Kael bled out, and she refused to accept either option. Below them she heard shouts. The soldiers had reached the cave entrance, had discovered they were gone. In moments they'd find the passage, follow them up. She climbed faster, harder, pushing past the pain and exhaustion. "Almost there," she gasped. "Just a little more. Stay with me, Kael. Please stay with me." "Still here," he managed, though his voice was barely a whisper. "Not going anywhere without you." Her head broke through into open air. The stars were brilliant, impossibly bright, and the night wind on her face felt like salvation. She pulled herself out of the chimney, then reached back down for Kael. "Your hand, give me your hand." He reached up and she grabbed his wrist with both hands and pulled with everything she had left. He was dead weight now, barely conscious, and for one terrible moment she thought she couldn't do it, that her strength would fail, and he'd slip back into the darkness. But then something inside her broke loose, not weakness, but power, the primal strength of absolute necessity. She screamed with effort and hauled him up, pulled him through the opening and onto the solid rock beside her. They collapsed together on the canyon rim, both gasping for air. Evelyn could see blood spreading across Kael's shirt, dark and terrible in the starlight. Too much blood, too fast. "We have to move," he wheezed. "They'll be coming." "You can't move. You've lost too much blood." "Then leave me. Save yourself." "I told you not without you." She tore more strips from her dress, wadding them against his wound. The fabric was immediately soaked. "I'm going to stop this bleeding if it kills me." "It might kill us both." But he was smiling, that same fierce, impossible smile he'd given her in the canyon below. "You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met." "Good. You're going to need stubborn to survive this." She pressed harder on the wound, and he groaned, but the blood flow seemed to slow slightly. "I'm not going to let you die, Kael. You hear me? I won't allow it." "Is that an order?" "Damn right it is." He laughed, then coughed, and when the coughing stopped, there was blood on his lips. Internal damage, she realized with cold horror. The bullet had done more than just pierce flesh. It had torn something vital inside him. "Kael, I know." He touched her face again, his fingers cold despite the warm night. "Listen to me. There's a valley 3 days north of here. Hidden place where the mountains fold in on themselves. Apache sacred ground. The soldiers won't go there even if they find it. There's water, shelter, everything you need. We'll go there together, Evelyn, together." She was crying now, tears cutting through the dust and blood on her face. "You don't get to save me just to die. That's not how this works. We made it this far, we can make it the rest of the way." Below them, torches appeared in the canyon, soldiers finding the passage, beginning the climb. They had minutes at most before they'd be discovered. "Can you stand?" Evelyn asked. "I don't think so." "Then I'll carry you." "You can't watch me. It should have been impossible." Kael was taller than her, heavier, and Evelyn had already pushed her body past every reasonable limit. But love, and she realized now that's what this was, this fierce, protective devotion that had grown between them made the impossible merely difficult. She got him upright somehow, got her shoulder under his arm, wrapped her other arm around his waist. His weight nearly crushed her, but she locked her knees and took a step, then another, moving away from the chimney and the approaching soldiers. "You're insane," Kael muttered to you. "Probably. Keep breathing. That's your job right now. Just keep breathing." They moved across the rocky plateau like two drunks staggering and stumbling, held upright by nothing but determination and refusal to surrender. Behind them, the first torch appeared at the chimney exit. Shouts echoed across the stone. "There, on the ridge! Shoot them! Don't let them escape!" Bullets whined through the darkness, but the range was too far and the light too poor. The shots went wide, sparking off distant rocks. Evelyn kept moving, dragging Kael with her, focusing on nothing but the next step and the next breath. The plateau sloped downward into another canyon, darker, narrower, filled with shadows where they might hide. She aimed for it, using gravity to help, now half carrying and half dragging Kael down the slope. Rocks shifted under her feet. She fell twice, and both times somehow got back up, got Kael back up, kept going. At the canyon bottom, she found a crevice, a crack between two massive boulders, barely wide enough to squeeze through. She pushed Kael in first, then followed, and they collapsed together in the narrow space. Above them, torches bobbed across the plateau, searching. "Rest," she whispered. "Just rest for a moment." Kael's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow and irregular. She pressed her hand to his chest and felt his heartbeat weak, but still there, still fighting. She checked the bandage and found it soaked again, but there was nothing more she could do. She'd used every piece of fabric she could spare, and her dress was barely decent anymore, so she did the only thing left to do. She lay down beside him in that narrow space, wrapped the remains of his blanket around both of them, and held him. His head rested against her shoulder, his breathing slow and labored against her neck. She could feel his blood soaking into her clothes, his body growing colder despite the warm night. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please, Kael. I know you're tired, I know it hurts, but stay with me just a little longer. We're so close. That valley you told me about, we'll find it together. We'll be safe there. We'll build a life. Just stay." "Evelyn," his voice was barely audible, "if I don't make it, you will. If I don't, you'll have to promise me something. Promise you'll keep going. Find that valley. Live the life we talked about. Don't let them win. I promise. But you're going to be there with me. You're going to see it." "I hope so." His hand found hers, squeezed weakly. "You saved me, you know, not just today. Every day since I found you, you reminded me why I survived the mines, what I was saving myself for. What was that? This, you, something worth protecting, something worth dying for." He coughed again, more blood. "Worth living for, too. Then live for it, live for me, live for us." His breathing was slowing, getting shallower. Evelyn felt panic rising like a scream in her throat, but she forced it down. Panic wouldn't help him, only warmth and pressure and will, sheer, stubborn will that refused to let him slip away. She held him tighter, sharing her body heat, her strength, everything she had. Above them, the soldiers' torches spread out across the plateau, searching every crack and shadow. But the night was vast, and they were two shadows among thousands, invisible to everyone who wasn't looking with the eyes of love. Hours passed. The moon rose and set. The soldiers eventually moved on their search, spreading wider, losing focus. And through it all, Evelyn held Kael and willed him to survive. She talked to him, whispered stories from her childhood, told him about the life she imagined for them in that hidden valley. She told him she loved him, said the words she'd been feeling for days but hadn't dared speak. She told him he was the bravest, strongest, most stubborn man she'd ever met, and that she needed him to be stubborn one more time. "Don't you dare die on me, Kael. You promised we'd face everything together, so you fight. You hear me. You fight for every breath, for every heartbeat. Fight for us." Dawn came slowly, painting the canyon in shades of rose and gold, the same colors as that first night when he'd saved her life. Evelyn watched the light spread across the stone and felt Kael stir against her shoulder. His eyes opened, focused on her face. And despite everything, despite the blood and pain and nearness of death, he smiled. "You're still here," he whispered. "Where else would I be? Most people would have run by now. I'm not most people. You taught me that. She touched his face, feeling warmth returning to his skin. How do you feel? Like death, but still alive. He tried to sit up and gasped, falling back. The soldiers. Gone for now. They're searching further out. Then we need to move, before they come back. Can you? He considered this seriously. Maybe, with help. Then let's go find that valley. She helped him sit up, careful of his wounds. 3 days north, you said. 3 days if you're healthy. Maybe 5 for me. He looked at her, at the determined out of her jaw and the fierce light in her eyes. You really think we can make it? I dragged you up a 100-foot cliff wall while you were bleeding out. After that 3 days through the desert, sounds easy. He laughed, then winced at the pain it caused. When did you get so strong? When I had someone worth being strong for. She got her shoulder under his arm again, taking his weight. Come on, let's go home. They emerged from the crevice into the golden morning light. The canyon was empty, peaceful, showing no signs of the violence that had taken place the night before. Birds sang in the distance. The wind carried the scent of sage and stone and possibility. Kael leaned heavily on Evelyn, but he was walking, putting one foot in front of the other. They moved slowly through the canyon, heading north, leaving behind the Blood Canyon and everything it represented, the violence, the hatred, the world that wanted them dead or enslaved. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, pain, but also freedom, also hope, also love that had been forged in fire and proven stronger than fear. Evelyn adjusted Kael's weight on her shoulder, feeling the strength in her body that she'd never known existed until she'd needed it. She looked at the man beside her, scarred, bleeding, barely alive, but still fighting, and felt something settle deep in her chest. This was her path. This man was her choice. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The sun climbed higher, burning away the gentle morning colors and replacing them with harsh desert light. But for once, the heat felt like blessing instead of punishment. They were alive. They were free. They were together. And that, for now, was everything. The journey north took 6 days instead of 3. 6 days of supporting Kael's weight while he fought fever and infection. 6 days of hiding from patrols that swept through the canyons like wolves hunting wounded prey. 6 days of pushing through pain and exhaustion until Evelyn couldn't remember what it felt like to not hurt. But they made it. On the 6th day, as the sun climbed toward noon, they crested a ridge and looked down into a valley that seemed carved from dreams. It was everything Kael had promised, and more, a hidden basin ringed by sheer cliffs that rose like cathedral walls toward the sky. A stream wound through its center, fed by a spring that emerged from living rock. Cottonwood trees grew thick along the water, their leaves rustling silver-green in the breeze. And everywhere, wildflowers, purple and yellow and red, painting the valley floor in colors Evelyn had thought existed only in paintings. This is it, Kael said, his voice hoarse but steady. He'd been getting stronger over the past 2 days, the fever breaking at last. Apache sacred ground. My grandfather brought me here when I was a boy, taught me the trails that only the people knew. It's beautiful, Evelyn whispered. It's home. He looked at her, then his eyes clear for the first time since the bullet had torn through him. If you'll have it. If, you'll have me. She kissed him instead of answering her lips, finding his with a tenderness that surprised them both. It was their first real kiss, not the desperate collision of fear and survival, but something deeper, a choice made freely without bullets or blood or terror forcing their hands. When they pulled apart, Kael was smiling. I'll take that as a yes. It's a yes to everything, Evelyn said. To this valley, to you, to whatever life we can build here. Yes. They descended into the valley as the sun painted everything gold. The stream was cold and sweet, and they both drank deeply before collapsing on the soft grass near the water's edge. For the first time in a week, they were truly safe. The cliffs protected them, the isolation protected them, and the knowledge that they'd survived what should have killed them protected them most of all. Kael slept for 16 hours straight, his body finally allowing itself the rest it desperately needed. Evelyn kept watch, though she knew no one would find them here. She used the time to explore their new home, to learn the contours of the valley, to imagine what life might look like in this hidden sanctuary. When Kael finally woke, the fever was gone completely. The wound on his side was still angry and red, but it was healing cleanly. Whatever infection had threatened to kill him had lost its hold. "You look better," Evelyn said, bringing him water in a cup she'd fashioned from bark. "I feel human again." He drank, then studied her face. "You look exhausted. When did you last sleep?" "I don't remember." "Then sleep now, I'll watch." But Evelyn shook her head. "Not yet. First we need to build proper shelter. Those clouds to the west, there's rain coming. We need to be ready." Together, moving slowly but with purpose, they began building their home. It started as a simple lean-to made from cottonwood branches and grass wedged against an overhanging cliff face that provided natural protection. But as the days passed, it grew more elaborate. They wove walls from willow branches. They collected flat stones for a fire pit. They made a door from braided grass that could be closed against the wind. It was crude by any civilized standard, but it was theirs, built by their own hands, answerable to no one's judgment but their own. The rain came on the third night, drumming against their roof of woven grass and leaves. They huddled together inside their shelter, listening to the storm, and Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood: simple contentment. Not happiness exactly, because happiness seemed too small a word for what she felt, but peace, belonging, the bone-deep knowledge that she was exactly where she needed to be. "Tell me about your family," she said quietly. "Before the soldiers came, before the camps." Kael was silent for a long time, and she thought maybe she'd asked too much, pushed too far into wounds that were still too raw. But then he began to speak, his voice soft in the darkness. "My father was a hunter, the best in our band. He could track anything, deer, elk, even mountain lions. He taught me everything, not just hunting, but how to read the land, how to be part of it instead of just moving through it." He paused, remembering. "My mother was a healer. She knew every plant, every remedy. People came from other bands to seek her wisdom. And your sister?" His voice cracked slightly. "Ayita. It means first to dance. She was 12 winters old, always laughing, always moving. She wanted to be a warrior, even though the elders said women should be healers or mothers. But my father let her train with the boys, said spirit mattered more than tradition." "She sounds wonderful." "As she was, and they killed her in the dark, under the earth, where she never saw the sky again." The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. 3 months. She survived in those mines before the fever took her. I held her while she died, promised I'd escape and tell the world what they'd done. But who would listen? Who would care about one Apache girl when there's gold to be dug and railroads to build? Evelyn took his hand in the darkness. "I care, and I'll help you tell her story. Somehow, someday, we'll make sure she's remembered. You can't fight them all, Evelyn. Your father Webb, all the men with money and power, they own the world. People like us, we can only run and hide." "Maybe," Evelyn said, "or maybe we're the beginning of something. Maybe every person who chooses freedom over comfort, who chooses truth over convenient lies, maybe we're building something new. Not an army or a revolution, just different choices, different paths." Kael pulled her closer, and they lay together listening to the rain. "You have more faith than I do. You have more courage than I do. Between us, maybe we're complete." He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. "I love you, Evelyn Carter. I don't know if Apache warriors are supposed to say such things to white women, but I don't care anymore about supposed to. I love you. I love you too." She tilted her face up to his. "And I don't care what the world says we're supposed to be. This is what we are. This is what we choose." They made love that night, for the first time tender and careful of his healing wounds, discovering each other with hands that had killed to protect, but now touched only with gentleness. It was nothing like Evelyn had been taught to expect from the marriage bed. No shame or duty or performance. Just two people choosing each other freely, claiming joy in a world that had tried to deny them both. Afterward, as they lay tangled together beneath the blanket that had saved Evelyn's life that first terrible night, she felt complete in a way she'd never experienced. Not perfect. They were both too scarred, too marked by violence and loss for perfection, but whole. Two broken pieces that somehow fit together to make something stronger than either had been alone. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary. They woke with the sun and worked until exhaustion claimed them, building hunting-gathering pung. Kael taught Evelyn to track and shoot properly to move through the landscape like shadow and wind. She taught him more English and he taught her Apache, and they created their own language that borrowed from both and belonged to neither. The valley provided everything they needed. Fish in the stream, rabbits and quail in the grass, berries and roots and wild onions. They lived simply, but they lived. And slowly, almost without noticing, they began to heal. Kael's physical wounds closed and scarred. Evelyn's hands grew calloused and strong. The nightmares came less frequently. One morning Evelyn woke to find Kael gone from their shelter. She pulled on the rough dress she'd made from deer, hide her silk and lace long abandoned, and went looking for him. She found him by the stream, standing very still, watching the water. "What is it?" she asked. He gestured to the stream bank. There in the soft mud were tracks, boot prints, fresh ones, maybe a day old. Soldiers. Evelyn felt her stomach clench with fear. No, wrong pattern. These are Apache. He crouched, studying the prints carefully. Young warrior traveling alone, probably a scout from one of the reservation bands. Will he tell them we're here? Kael was quiet for a moment. I don't know, maybe. But if he does, they won't betray us to the white soldiers. They'll want to know why I'm here with you, what it means. And what does it mean? He looked up at her, his expression serious. It means I've chosen a path that takes me away from my people. It means I love a white woman in a world where that's seen as betrayal by both sides. He stood, taking her hands. Are you afraid? Yes, Evelyn admitted, but not of your people. I'm afraid of losing this, losing you, losing the life we're building. Then we don't lose it. His grip tightened. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's still true, yes, always true. But the knowledge that they'd been found, even by someone who might be friendly, changed something. The valley no longer felt quite so isolated, quite so safe. They became more careful, more vigilant. Kael taught Evelyn how to erase their tracks, how to hide signs of their presence. They built a second shelter high in the cliffs. As an emergency refuge, stocked it with supplies and weapons. The Apache scout returned a week later, and this time he didn't hide his presence. He walked openly into the valley at dawn, his hands empty of weapons, calling out in Apache. Kael responded, stepping out of their shelter to meet him. Evelyn watched from the doorway as the two men spoke rapidly in a language she was only beginning to understand. She caught a few words, names, places, questions. The scout's eyes kept drifting to her, curious but not hostile. Finally, Kael gestured for her to join them. This is Nahuel. He's from my mother's band, or what's left of it. They're on the reservation now, 40 miles east. Tell him I'm honored to meet him, Evelyn said. Kael translated, and Nahuel nodded, studying her with frank curiosity. He was young, maybe 18, with intelligent eyes and the same lean, efficient build as Kael. He spoke again, and Kael translated. He says his people have heard stories about a white woman who chose freedom over gold, about an Apache warrior who defied death to protect her, about Blood Canyon and the soldiers who died there. Kael paused. He says the elders want to know if the stories are true. What did you tell him? That they're true, all of it. Nahuel spoke again longer, this time his tone respectful but questioning. When he finished, Kael was quiet for a long moment before translating. He says the elders debate what you represent. Some think you're a spy, that this is a trick to find Apache hiding places. Others think you're a sign that if one white person can choose a different path, maybe more will follow. Maybe change is possible. He met her eyes. They want to meet you, judge for themselves. Evelyn's heart raced. What do you think I should do? I think you should choose. Kael's voice was steady. We can stay here hidden and hope they leave us alone, or we can go to them, tell our story, and see if bridges can be built. Both choices have risks. She thought about it, about everything they'd survived to reach this valley, about Aida and all the others who died in the darkness of those mines, about Reed and Webb and all the men who profited from keeping people separate, afraid at war. I'll go, she said. I'll tell them everything, what Webb and my father planned, what I saw and heard, what I chose. She looked at Nahuel, then back to Kael. Maybe they won't believe me. Maybe they'll see me as the enemy no matter what I say. But I have to try. Kael translated, and something shifted in Nahuel's expression, respect maybe, or surprise. He spoke again, and Kael smiled slightly. He says you have a warrior's heart, that Aida would have liked you. Tears pricked Evelyn's eyes. Tell him that's the greatest compliment I've ever received. They left for the reservation the next morning, Nahuel leading the way through trails only Apache eyes could follow. It was a 2-day journey, and Evelyn spent it thinking about what she would say, how she could possibly explain the choices she'd made to people who had every reason to hate her. The reservation was worse than she'd imagined. Rows of crude shelters built from cast-off lumber and canvas. People who should have been strong and proud reduced to accepting government rations. Children with empty eyes and swollen bellies. The evidence of systematic destruction of a people being slowly erased. The elders met them in the largest shelter, 5 men and 3 women, whose faces were maps of suffering and survival. They listened as Kael told their story, speaking in Apache, so Evelyn could only guess at his words, from context and the occasional phrase she recognized. She saw surprise, doubt, anger, and eventually something that might have been curiosity. Finally, one of the elder women spoke directly to Evelyn in careful English. You are the railroad baron's daughter. Your father's trains carry soldiers who hunt us. His money builds the towns that destroy our land. Why should we believe you are different? Evelyn took a deep breath. Because I'm not asking you to. I can't change what my father is or what his money does. I can only tell you what I saw and what I chose. Marcus Webb, the man I was supposed to marry, was planning to buy Apache prisoners from army raids and sell them to mining camps. I heard him say it, I heard him plan it, and I couldn't be part of it, so I ran. Many white people know these things happen. Another elder said, they do nothing. Why are you different? I don't know if I am different. Maybe I'm just a coward who ran from an uncomfortable truth. But Kael saved my life, and I saw... Her voice cracked. I saw the scars from the mines. I heard about his sister, about all the people who died in the dark, and I realized that my comfortable life, my silk dresses and fancy parties, all of it was built on bones and blood. And I couldn't unknow that. I couldn't go back to pretending. She looked at Kael, then back to the elders. I love him, not because he's Apache or despite it, but because of who he is, brave and kind and stronger than anyone I've ever met. And maybe love between a white woman and an Apache man can't change anything. Maybe it's too small a thing to matter, but it's what I have to offer. My story, my truth, my choice to stand with him against everyone who says we're wrong. Silence fell. The elders looked at each other, having some conversation without words that Evelyn couldn't follow. Finally, the elder woman spoke again. You cannot undo what your people have done. You cannot save us with love alone. I know, Evelyn said quietly. I'm not trying to save anyone. I'm just trying to live differently, to choose differently. The woman's stern expression softened slightly. That is honest. We have had many white people come here with promises and lies. But you do not promise. You do not lie. You only say, this is who I am, this is what I choose. She glanced at Kael. "And you have protected one of our warriors when you could have betrayed him for safety. That means something." Another elder spoke in Apache, and Kael translated. "He says you may stay in the valley. It's sacred ground, but you've proven you respect it." And he paused, something emotional crossing his face. "He says my family would have welcomed you, that you honor their memory by choosing truth over comfort." Evelyn felt tears spilling down her cheeks. She didn't try to hide them. "Thank you, all of you, for listening, for seeing me as more than just my father's daughter." They stayed at the reservation for 3 days, and Evelyn witnessed firsthand the systematic destruction of a people. But she also witnessed resilience, dignity, and a refusal to be erased despite everything. She met survivors of the mining camps who bore the same scars as Kael. She heard stories about Aita, about the bright girl who'd wanted to be a warrior and had been brave until the very end. And she told her own story to anyone who would listen, about Webb's plans, about her father's complicity, about the machinery of profit that ground human lives into dust. She couldn't change what had been done, but she could witness it, remember it, refuse to let it be forgotten. On the 3rd day, as they prepared to return to their valley, the elder woman approached Evelyn and pressed something into her hand. It was a small bracelet woven from grass and decorated with tiny blue beads. "This belonged to Aida," she said quietly. "Her mother made it for her 7th birthday. I've kept it since the mines." She closed Evelyn's fingers around it. "You carry her memory now, you and Kael both. Make sure she's not forgotten." Evelyn could barely speak through her tears. "I promise. I swear I'll remember her. I'll make sure the world knows what happened." "Good." The woman touched Evelyn's face gently. "You are braver than you know, child. Walking between 2 worlds, belonging fully to neither, that takes courage." They returned to their valley as winter began to touch the high country. The cottonwoods turned gold, then bare. The first snow dusted the cliffs. They spent long evenings by the fire, Kael teaching Evelyn the old stories while she practiced Apache words and phrases. They made love and argued and laughed and built a life that belonged to no one's rules but their own. One morning, Evelyn woke to find fresh snow on the ground, and Kael already up working on something by the fire. She joined him and saw he was carving a piece of wood, his knife moving with practiced precision. "What are you making?" she asked. "A marker for Aita." He held up the wood, showing her the careful symbols he'd carved. "In Apache tradition, we speak the names of the dead, keep their memory alive. I want to make a proper memorial for her, for all of them." "Where will you put it?" "Here in the valley. So every day we remember what we're living for, who we're living for." Evelyn knelt beside him, watching his careful work. "Tell me about the symbols. What do they mean? This one means dancer. This one means brave heart. And this," he traced a complex pattern. "This means not forgotten. It's a promise that no matter what happens to us, someone will remember." "I'll remember," Evelyn said. "And someday when it's safe, I'll write everything down, all of it. Your story, Aida's story, everything that happened in those camps. I'll make sure people know the truth." "That's a dangerous promise." "Then it's a good thing I've learned to be dangerous." She touched the bracelet on her wrist, the one that had belonged to Aita. "We survived Blood Canyon. We can survive anything." Kael set down his carving and pulled her close. "When I first found you running through the desert, I thought I was saving one terrified girl. I didn't know I was meeting the strongest person I'd ever know. You made me strong, showed me I could be. No, I just showed you what was already there." He kissed her soft and sweet. "You saved yourself, Evelyn, and then you saved me." They finished the memorial together, planting it beside the stream, where wildflowers would bloom come spring. It was simple, just carved wood and careful symbols, but it represented everything they'd survived, everyone they'd lost, all the reasons they kept fighting. As the sun set that evening, painting the valley in chao shades of rose and gold, Evelyn stood beside Kael and looked at the life they'd built. Their rough shelter, their small garden, the memorial for Aita, the bracelet on her wrist, the man beside her. "I would rather face 1,000 enemies with you," she said quietly, "than live one day without you." Kael took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "Then we have already won." And it was true, not because they'd defeated their enemies, Reed and Webb, and all the others were still out there, still hunting, still destroying, not because they'd changed the world or saved anyone but themselves, but because they'd chosen freedom over fear, love over hatred, truth over comfortable lies. They'd chosen each other, and in a world that told them such choices were forbidden, impossible, wrong, they'd made those choices anyway, and built a life from the ashes of everything they'd lost. The valley stretched around them, holding them in its ancient embrace. The stream sang its endless song. The wind carried the scent of snow and sage and possibility. And two people who'd been told they couldn't exist stood together watching the sunset. Their hands clasped, their hearts free, proving that love, real love, the kind built on sacrifice and survival and absolute choice, was the most forbidden thing of all, because it was the one thing that could never be controlled, bought, or destroyed. They were alive, they were free, they were together, and nothing, not armies or money or the laws written to keep them apart, could take that away.